It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pure Performance International Edition. My name is Brian Wilson, your co-host, and as always, with me is Andy Grabner, coming to you live, recorded from, where are you today, Andy?
I'm in lovely Krakow in Poland.
Ah, yes. Very good. You've been traveling quite a lot?
Yeah, I've been traveling. Well, it's my second time here, but I've been traveling quite a bit in the last couple of weeks, and traveling continues for the next 3 weeks. And but it's a lovely city here, a lot of history, which is true obviously for a lot of places on this part of the Atlantic, or on this side of the Atlantic. But yeah, happy to be on the show again. And Brian, today we have a special guest. Well, we always have special guests, as we say, right?
Right, but we like to single out some of them to make the others feel worse, I think. Before you go, I did want to clarify the international edition that I said before. Yeah. It's really meaningless. We're almost always international, but I felt now that you're traveling and you're based in Europe and our guest is also in another European, although they might not like to consider themselves European, another European country, we have very, very, very widespread representation today.
Yeah, exactly. And with that, Chris, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. Hey, Chris, do you mind giving a quick introduction about you, who you are, and then I want to kind of come back and say why we have you on the show?
So Chris Burrell. I'm currently in London. I work for a startup that we've been going for about 4 years, and we're in the fintech space. So peer-to-peer, which I believe started in the UK, then went over to the States, and then had a kind of rebound in the UK. So I joined them about 2.5 years ago, and kind of head up the tech here.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And you have, the two of us, we met a couple of weeks ago in Barcelona when you were actually giving a talk at Perform at our conference, and you explained, how your architecture looks like, that you move towards microservices, but you focused a lot on your build process and your CI/CD pipeline. And then one thing struck me. This is why I reached out to you after the show, after the presentation, said we need to get you on the podcast, because you said, we kind of got rid of testing or at least end-to-end testing in our pipeline, which allows us to actually build in a matter of minutes. And so that struck me, because we've been talking a lot about testing and how important testing is, and testing. And now you stand there on stage and basically say, well, we don't need this end-to-end testing anymore. We just deploy into production, I guess, and then figure out based on the feedback if it's good or not. Now, I know it's not that dramatic, or maybe it is. So I would like to pass it over to you and maybe explain a little bit how it got to that point, if you've always built, let's say, within minutes, or if it was different before, and then how you got to the point where you are right now, and what the best practices are and lessons learned.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wouldn't say we've got rid of testing, so that would be quite scary for all our customers. Like, what are you doing? Okay. Like, we need to know our money is safe. So, but what we have done is rethink the kind of testing that we do. So in previous companies that I worked for, and also at the beginning of Landbay, you've got the standard thing where you deploy to a staging environment or a UAT environment. Then you kind of run your Selenium tests. We had a Selenium grid running thousands of tests here. And then once that's ready, you get a bit of feedback. Maybe you decide to break the pipeline and start again because the tests have failed. Sometimes the tests aren't quite stable, so some people run them 2-3 times to see what's the best outcome. And eventually you'd go to production. And really that's kind of been driven from different waterfall strategies usually, and then it's kind of poured in, I think, to Agile. But if you look at a pipeline as a whole, I think we looked at it, and our testing was like 45 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour, even with some parallelization. And that's just too long for us. We don't really want to be remembering who kicked off a build when and what features are in the build. So that's one side. The other side is actually when you're looking at microservices and lots of different components going in all at different times, we didn't really want to create a dependency on all of our microservices kind of reaching a point where everyone stalls. And because that in itself creates delays, that means you need a release manager, that means you need to know what's on your environment at any point in time. And so the faster your deployments are, then the faster, the less headache you have, really. So that's where we started.
Cool. And so in the I actually looking at a blog post right now that says skills. It's from Skills Matter, and I definitely want to put the link up there on the podcast page. And you were mentioning, and as you just said, right, you had a starting point, and it seems the starting point or the pivotal moment. And I'm not sure if this was an accurate conversation, but it reads very interesting when you look on this page where you say the developer says, "I'm done with the code."
Andy, shall we act it out?
Shall we do it? Shall we act it out? Okay.
Do you want to be the developer? You be the developer, because I could do a good boss voice.
Yeah. Okay. I'm the developer. You're the boss, and then at the end, obviously, we're all the team. Okay.
Okay.
That's good. Okay. Yes. I'm the developer.
Okay.
Hey, I'm done with the code. Just need to test and deploy now.
Great. When can I see it live?
I believe at the end of the sprint, right?
2 weeks? Why does it take 2 weeks to put a few lines of code into production?
Well, actually, I might have found a way to make it 6 minutes.
Gosh. Sorry, everybody.
That's okay. Isn't actually, I just thought about it, if you remember Star Trek, wasn't it always, it takes me 2 weeks, I give you an hour, and then Scotty did it in 2 minutes anyway?
Yeah.
It would be like another cool extension to this.
And I just realized, for Chris's sake, I should have channeled my Baron Vilas, was it Silas von Greenback from Danger Mouse? Danger Mouse! Anyhow. That's my Britishism for you.
Sure. Sorry.
All right. I don't know if you know that one. That might be before your time.
I grew up in France, actually, so a lot of the English stuff is lost on me.
There you go. Okay. Anyway, back to 6 minute deployment. So yeah, Andy, go on.
Yeah. So tell me, Chris, what else? What did you do? What were the individual steps that you really did, and what are some of the lessons learned?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing we would look at is time to build, right? So the default stat, Jenkins, kind of tells you exactly how long it takes, but if you can kind of stage it, you know exactly where your time spent. And I think everyone would agree browser testing is basically the slowest component. So based on both headaches of stability, having to deploy all of the services, having to kind of get to the same time, we kind of thought, right, what can we do differently? And everyone knows that the faster the tests are, the better for the developer. And the earlier the tests, the less good it is for the customer, because it's less representative. So we actually took that approach by saying, okay, well, we're going to test contracts. And there's a whole host of patterns out there at the moment, like consumer-driven contracts, and which is kind of the acronym CDC. So we looked a little bit at that. That wasn't so mature when we first started. But essentially what we've done is we've broken down our services to contracts. And by contract, we mean a REST interface usually, or a message interface. And then we'll test black boxes, what those contracts should be. So I'm sending an HTTP request, and I expect an HTTP request out that we can mock, or I send a message, I expect an HTTP request. So we've built a little bit of framework with Cucumber and some of those common tools there. But really, those calls are much faster. So rather than having to stand up a browser and a Selenium grid, what we've got is we just spin up the Docker image and fire messages at it, and it's very, very, very fast. So our fastest service at the moment deploys in about 6 minutes, and our slowest one deploys in about 12, I think. And that's because it adds a whole host of other stuff to EC2, like an API gateway, and so with AWS. So really cutting out that bit and thinking, right, we've taken a lot of risk by cutting it out. How are we going to mitigate it? And ideally earlier, because it's faster. But you may also need to mitigate some stuff later, and so kind of monitoring tools and fast feedback loops are quite important to that.
Mm-hmm. So when these contracts are interesting, because it reminds me a little bit of what Acacia Cruz has been telling us, what they do at Google, and also then kind of the concept that we have, which we call monitoring as code, where, coming back to what Acacia said, he said when they develop a new service, they also sit down, and then in a config file they basically configure what type of service is it, right? Is it the front end? Is it a backend service? This decides then who is allowed to call it and who and what else can this service call. But then also they list the key APIs and endpoints, and then based on that, on the fly, generate the test scripts, which are then automatically getting executed as part of the pipeline. It seems you're doing the same thing.
Yeah, so we're doing something very, very similar. So we're using Swagger to generate our contracts. So we write our contracts in YAML and generate a JavaScript client, say, or a TypeScript client for our Angular apps or Java clients. And that means if we're versioning that, we can actually test backwards compatibility against those at build time. We don't even need tests, right? You can check that if you're adding a parameter, that's okay. If you're removing a parameter and there's any clients using that contract, then you can check that fails at build time. So that's one way of testing it. And obviously compile time is the best thing for the developer because he doesn't need to wait at all. And then the second thing we're doing is basically agreeing at design times, the developer picks up story, and with the rest of the team kind of working out what's an appropriate API, what's an appropriate interface for this. And by that, we've kind of got models for our events, and we've got the Swagger, so the API. And so then you can just test it. You can just say, if I'm expecting a REST call with X parameter with this kind of value here, and if the database is set up over in this way that we're mocking out, then this is response. And so this is it. Yeah, it's very quick. It's much faster than having to put, say, 4 microservices live and set up a whole load of test data and ensure you've got some login accounts for your users, and then making sure the tests don't interact with each other, which is a big problem for us. And then you have to actually navigate 5-6 different pages in your site before you reach your use case. Then you click your button, and then you've got your result. Here we kind of skip the entire thing. Mm-hmm. And so for our front end, as you mentioned, we've got some front end services, and there what we're trying to do is mock out all of the REST calls it makes, and then we might drive some of those use cases with something like Selenium. But again, that's very fast because it's a mocked data layer there.
Mm-hmm. So you basically really eliminate the whole challenge of building a complete system and having sure that all of it is connected and there and available. So you really just look at each individual part of your architecture, front end and individual microservices, and you test them in isolation based on all the contracts. And if I understand this correctly, Chris, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understood, if I have, let's say, I have a new build, I made a change to an API. You generate the new client. So with that new client, you can test the new version, but you then also use I would assume, the client that has been generated in the previous build. So you always test if the previous version of the client, which was generated for the previous version of the API, is also still working, or how would do I assume this correctly?
There's a couple of things there. So the stuff we're actually working on right now. So testing that clients are backwards compatible. So if you've got your contract and well, actually, let's take the server case first. You've got your contract the server's abiding by, and you want to enhance the server. A server might have multiple clients, right? So the server wants to check that what it's pushing is backwards compatible with itself, and then it can make sure that all the clients are okay with that. From a client perspective, when you push live, we try and check on Jenkins when it builds that we've defined the client only to know what it cares about. So that's key. So that if the server changes, like adding parameters, the clients don't really need to know about that until they use the data. And so we will check the client's contract against the server deployed contract, not against any code base. So we can just when the servers deploy, you can track what the latest API is, and then when the clients deploy, you just get the latest and use it. So there's some tools that we're using called Swagger Diff, which is kind of I think it's a Ruby plugin, and you just give it 2 swaggers and it tells you where they're compatible. So some of that work we've done, some of that we're actually doing this sprint and next sprint.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
I've I guess I started my work in computers in 2001, starting with some functional QA, quickly going into performance. And, I've got to admit what you're describing makes, I don't do that stuff anymore right now because I work for the lovely company Dynatrace and got to get away from all that. But it makes me very nervous hearing what you're saying with the past that I have. And now I got to ask, obviously you're here talking about this. You've done some presentations, you're still doing it. So you're making it successful, but I'm curious to know, maybe obviously you've probably had some stumbles along the way, maybe not, but if you have, what have those stumbles been? And do you feel that you have it really down to a science now, or do you sometimes wake up at night wondering if this is all going to fall apart? Because that's what would be in my head, at least from that at least my background of history of coming from the older style of doing things.
Yeah, so let me actually add a bit of context around my career. So when I first arrived in London, I worked for a company called Detica for 7-8 years. And the first role I did was a functional tester and automating Selenium tests, and actually then doing performance tests with Load Runner and things like that. So I've kind of got a what do QA people think about, and what do they care about, and what do we want to test? I think the question isn't so much are we doing the testing or not, it's where are we doing the testing. And so you could argue that if you've got a separate dev team and then a separate QA team, what you've just done there is introduced a whole pile of risk, because the developers know intricately how the thing is supposed to work because they built it. But the QA actually person looks at the business side, right? So they go back to the business requirement and check that the software developed abides by the business rules, requirements that you've kicked off. What we've tried to do actually in our team is to make our engineers responsible for both. So in our recruiting, our first question is, what do you know about Landbay? What do we do? Because if they don't know, we just won't progress to the technical side. So I think one thing around that risk is actually eliminating some of the process and the people issues. All of our people care about why are we developing this thing, as opposed to say one of those old school waterfall models where you write a 150-page functional spec and then you hand it over, and then it's good luck to whoever picks it up. But yeah, in terms of the risk, there have been some instances where bugs have gone live. I think that's pretty much in line with my previous experience. Depending on the level of quality that the company you work for wants, there's kind of varying degrees of testing and stuff. But I think I would argue that relying on end-to-end testing by then not doing other stuff doesn't necessarily make the quality better. So a lot of programs that I've worked on previously, so I worked on some big telcos and on HMRC, people run out of funds, and the first thing to get cut is the testing. People want to go live. So actually, if you're doing the testing as you go, and everything is kind of feature driven, and a feature for us might be 3 days and then it's live. So you've actually tested the whole thing, and you can spend that time without actually compromising the program as a whole. So I think it's a different paradigm shift, but I'm not sure we're introducing more risk. And I think we do use Dynatrace at the very end to we run our web checks to make sure the site's up. And there's some key functions that we test, and then if users are experiencing issues, then we get them. But ultimately, I think the question is, what is the impact to the user, and are you happy with that? Because if a picture is like 2 pixels to one side, you're not going to be able to justify to anyone, we should spend £500-600 on getting some testing that just tests those pixels. And so it's always it's always going to be a compromise of money you spend versus the quality you want. And I think we found the money spent earlier in the process actually gives us higher quality.
And I think some of the difference in what you're doing is, we've heard about a lot of people not, doing, and we do it ourselves, doing a lot of testing early, right? Not always doing end-to-end testing, but I think a lot of people so far have been doing more of a hybrid approach where they're not testing everything end-to-end, but every once in a while there's some sort of end-to-end test. It kind of sounds like you guys have just eliminated it altogether and of saying we've really solidified what we're doing on this other side, that we just really don't need that end-to-end. And I think that's like the big leap that you've taken that others just haven't had. I don't even know if it's the confidence, the setup, or what it might be, to just get rid of that end-to-end test. And it's probably not for everybody, I'm sure.
I think one thing is the culture in the tech community that's kind of evolved. So we used to have waterfall projects. Now everyone's kind of thinking, right, Agile's the next thing and we need to move to Agile. But then the contracts haven't moved that way. And so if you work for a big consultancy, then it will be kind of a payment milestone after you've kind of worked out what the requirements are, a payment milestone when it's ready for the customer to test, and then a payment milestone once it's live. And the testing seems to mirror that contract, which is quite a waterfall way of seeing things. Whereas if you get away from that contract, then you kind of think, well, actually, how did we do it before? Well, we tested things as we went, and we put things live when they were ready, rather than waiting for entire release cycles of like 6 months, 9 months. And so I think microservices is going to probably accelerate this, and it's kind of a prediction, I guess, but the more microservices you deploy, the less you can wait for everything to be in one place before you test it.
And then I've got to ask, you're talking a lot about microservices. Are you all starting to eye functions?
Yeah, so we've started actually this week for a function. I'm in two minds about kind of serverless stuff. I think my main concern is we've got like 40 microservices right now, but that would be tens of thousands of functions. And so from a managing point of view, how do you remember there's a function X hanging around that's doing a critical piece of system? And that's kind of what the big argument against corporate and legacy code, like there's this system that no one wants to touch because no one knows whether it does anything or whether it's going to take a bank down. And so I think I'm waiting to see what the kind of dev environments are going to look like, what the management around those. There's been a few interesting blogs on the Register website around security, and a lot of the serverless stuff is like you deploy it, don't forget about it. But if there's a security flaw in there, then you really do need to kind of mop it up and remove it at some point. So yeah, I'm in two minds. I'm not against it. I'm not for it right now, but I think there's still quite a bit more headway, I think, to make on there.
Cool. Hey, I mean, this was fascinating to listen to you guys. What I wanted to add, the reason why it is also, easy, I would say, quote unquote, easier to focus on testing later, or just ignore the end-to-end testing, is because you are deploying rather frequently, like very often. That means the changes that you are deploying are much smaller, and therefore the need for doing full end-to-end test of all the suites are obviously, the need is not that big, because the smaller the change, the less the impact, right? At least, that's the way I would explain it. And what would be interesting for me though is now, Chris, when you do deploy, you said you do web checks. So that means you're doing some synthetic tests in production to make sure that at least the base functionality, I guess, or certain key use cases are still available and working. But when you deploy, do you use something like canary releases, or do you do blue-green deployments for individual services? Is that what you are doing?
So I guess some people would say this is a cowboy approach, but we release kind of blue-green, but very, very quickly. So we keep the live services up until 100% of the new services are up, and then we take the other ones down. But we don't do blue-green in the sense of testing traffic at the moment, partly because we're a startup. There's not a huge amount of traffic to help to test that. Whereas I know some people have got kind of metrics that they'll collate and feedback. So our deployments will go straight through. But what we do test is we do go through a UAT environment before production. And there, really, what we're testing is the deployment itself. So our database migrations are part of the pipeline. And then we'll check that the service obviously comes up, the data migration works, and the health checks happen. And so we might add a few health checks here and there for some critical pieces of functionality. But so we go through UAT, check that works, and then we'll go to production. And we have added some stuff in there. So occasions it's a fairly major release of something that can't be broken down. And so we do have a manual flag, so we can turn that on demand. But on the whole, 90%, 95% of our releases are automatic kind of UAT prod done.
Mm-hmm. And UAT prod, though, is a separate deployment. It's not that you're switching, because there will be blue-green anyway. So you really deploy into UAT with your test data, I would assume. And then
yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So we've done a lot of work around being able to get our test data back and anonymized, so whether that's for a developer or for the UAT environment. We can take it, put it back in an environment that we want. And so when we do the deployment, most of our deployments obviously most of our features will be new stuff, so we won't need that much data to be like representative of live. But occasionally we've taken the data back. That's a manual process at the moment, and looking to kind of automate that.
Mm-hmm. What's your data store? Is that RDS on AWS, or what is it?
Yeah, so it's mostly MariaDB on RDS, and then we've investigated a few times DynamoDB and Mongo. We had a bit of Mongo before, but that's been written out, as in we used it and then we rewrote something and lost it. And DynamoDB, we almost went for it and then actually saw the complexity around the DevOps and the controls, access controls, weren't quite granular enough for us. So that's a future thing. We've got a few other data stores like Elasticsearch or S3. It's kind of debatable whether the data stores or not, but Elasticsearch, I would say, probably definitely is.
Mm-hmm. And when you test the updates, you said you have your database updates. What do you do in case a database update fails? How does that work?
Yeah, so if they fail, then they're most likely to fail in UAT. Our database updates are always going to be backwards compatible, and that's something we enforce both at the kind of design phase and the code review before someone pushes the merge button. And then we use a tool called Flyway, which kind of checksums the upgrades. So you can't change a previous migration, for example, and you have to run them in order. So we've got a few controls around that. If it does fail, because we've kept the live services up, we're actually okay. And the new container is going to, I guess, be cycling. It's kind of going to start the migration this time, but we'll get Slack notifications to make sure we get to that very quickly. And also the Jenkins build will fail, so someone will notice that very quickly. But the service as such isn't down because of the blue-green deployment side of things.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool. So that means you said your fastest service, it takes 6 minutes. So that means 6 minutes from I run the build, which means it builds it deploys it in UAT, it does the web checks, and it then takes it and does a blue-green deployment in production. That's 6 minutes?
So 6 minutes will be the build, so Java build. We use Maven, so we could actually look at speeding up a bit, maybe with Gradle eventually. Then the service testing, so all the contract testing, which is absolutely key to making sure the quality's up. And before that, the build of the Docker image. Then the deployment to UAT, and then the deployment to production. That entire thing is 6 minutes, and then the first web check will run within the next 5 minutes of that. So it could run immediately afterwards, or it could be up to 4 or 5 minutes.
I think we're going to have to tell Bernd and Anita that, Andy.
Yeah, I know.
New challenge.
Yeah. 6 minutes to production, because we always, we talk about 1 hour code to production. We need it in 6 minutes. I'll do it in 2. That's awesome.
I think just one of the things is that I've often been asked, like, do you really need 6 minutes? And for features, it's not like someone's going to say, I want it 6 minutes earlier, or I want it 30 minutes earlier. If they've waited a week for it to even be prioritized or get onto the backlog, then they can wait a further 50 minutes, right? But for fixing things, that's actually quite useful. So if there's an emergency thing that happens, and it happens everywhere, then actually our time to fix has now been reduced to the fix time pretty much plus 5 minutes to get it through. So from a support point of view, that's actually quite a big asset.
Yeah, I think that was the same motivation that we had, right? I mean, we release features every other week with our sprint releases, but the idea is having a fast lane into production for exactly these emergency fixes. Yeah. So Chris, one last question on this. So you do your blue-green deployment, you said it's rather fast, so you really just basically shift the load and that's it. What happens then if a problem happens in production after a while, say after an hour? Do you have any automation mechanisms to potentially roll back to a previous version, or do you just roll forward basically because you can fix things so fast and then push it through within minutes?
Yeah, so at the moment it's the latter. So we'll get notified quite quickly, either because users are experiencing something, or we've got reconciliation dashboards or support portals that kind of do automated checks on the platform, as well as our Dynatrace solution. At the moment, the view is roll forward. We can roll back because all it is we keep the versions of every image that we've ever deployed and then maybe archive them after 6 months. So if someone were to log on to the ECS console, which is what we use in AWS, it's trivial. It's a minute to, well, it's a few seconds to change the revision down one, and then the service will be back to where it was. If you're doing that, you need to be really careful because we can guarantee backwards compatibility. So when you're deploying something new, it's backwards compatible, but people often forget that you can't always guarantee front compatibility. So if you've moved your data model on, then rolling back can actually be trickier than rolling forward. So at the moment, we mostly rely on rolling forward. And really, if you think about it, the only things that are absolutely major that you kind of need to fix really quickly is our user visible issues. And even then, you can restrict that. So for us, it'd be kind of financial issues as well as kind of logging into the platform. Those would be absolutely vital, and we need to get those right every time. But there's a few other things where you kind of think, well, actually, can it last another 10 minutes, 20 minutes? And it's probably fine.
Mm-hmm. Do you do any performance testing at all, or is that?
So not at the moment. So we have done for specific things, so specific use cases, and we'll kind of test that particular use case. So that's maybe where we'd use this manual approval flag, where we get a bunch of stuff into a representative environment, and then we'll test it. Some performance tests you can do locally, but that's not as good in terms of latencies and stuff like that. But so, for example, we've got a first of month run for interest. We expect lots of interest to be paid on our peer-to-peer platform, and therefore we've kind of rewritten that bit a few times in different ways to optimize it. And so there we've done quite a bit of performance testing, but it's more ad hoc than in our pipeline at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And you mentioned ECS, so that means you're running containers on ECS. Are you using? You're not using Fargate yet, right? Are you just?
No, we're not. So Fargate got announced just after we bought all of our reservations for EC2 instances. Yeah. So it's kind of unfortunate, really. We would consider using it, and I think the idea of having a kind of userless environment is quite appealing, both because hackers can't get in from a security point of view, and also Fargate in particular. Obviously, AWS will be supporting it and patching it, so it's less work for us to do. So we'll kind of look at it, but at the moment, our current infrastructure is paid for with reservations, but we're launching on a fairly large new project. So that is one thing we're looking at for this.
Fargate's kind of their Cloud Foundry-esque one, right? Is that right, Andy?
No, it's Fargate is basically, you don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure that runs your containers. So Fargate is they run containers for you, and they manage the underlying, let's say, infrastructure, like the EC2 instance that you would normally provide and put into the cluster. So that's why, container as a service, or it's, I'm not sure what the official term is.
Yeah, so it's a little bit bigger than a function and a little bit smaller than a kind of container running on yourself. So you pay by CPU and memory rather than by time of the instance.
Yeah. Cool. Hey, Chris, this was very insightful, and I know we could probably go off and talk more about other things that you like. I'm really interested in the whole contracts and how that fits in. But for the topic that we have today, how did you redefine, as you said, how did you redefine testing in a microservice world? How did we get build times down to 6 minutes or deployment times down to 6 minutes? Is there anything else you want to let the audience know before we wrap it up?
I think the only thing really is you want to be checking that where you're spending your money is the most appropriate thing. So as architectures evolve, then I think it's worth re-looking at testing, for example, but as well as architecture and development and all of that. So I think testing just needs to be kept in step with new architectures.
Right. So Andy, do you want to summon the summarator then?
Let's do it.
Summon the summarator. Sure. So, I learned a lot today, and I really what you just said, Chris. You have to reevaluate your testing strategy as you mature your architecture, as your products mature. I really like the fact that what I learned at least today is if you are, like in your case, a startup, if you start with a new architecture with microservices, then make sure these microservices can independently be deployed, giving everybody the flexibility that they want, ensuring though that every service is bound to their contracts, automatic contract validation, that nothing breaks on a contractual basis. I really like the fact that based on the contracts, you also generate your tests. So you validate with basic tests in your build pipeline that the service works as expected. You mentioned you're using Swagger UI and also Swagger Diff. That's great to actually figure out if what has changed between versions, and then do the dependency check. I also like the fact that you said, well, let's get it out as fast as possible and learn from the production environment. And in case something goes wrong, we roll forward because we can react to a problem within minutes, and we don't have a process where it takes us hours, days, or even weeks to react on the problem. This is why we do no longer need to think about necessarily rolling back, but it's always rolling forward. And one of the first things that you actually said, to reiterate that, is when you were looking at your initial pipeline, you saw the biggest time was actually spent obviously in browser testing, and this is the first thing you optimized away. So I think a lot of great lessons learned, and definitely want to make sure that we put the links up to your presentations that you had, and we would definitely love to have you back for more talks, because I think there's a lot of interesting aspects and a lot of interesting things that you guys are doing that a lot of people would like to do, but maybe cannot do for whatever reason, maybe because they are still constrained by old processes or old thinking. But listening to people like you shows us that new architectures also allow new processes and a new way of doing things in a different way as we used to do them in the past. For instance, testing. So that was great.
Well, thank you, Andy. My little thoughts on here will be just, again, coming from the more novice side of things, just pointing out how Chris mentioned that, he came originally in from functional testing and is doing this. So there's always a chance to level up and really start making strides and changes. Kind of makes me a little bit glad that I'm not in that side anymore, because I get to dabble in these things at my own leisure. But it can definitely be challenging. But I think especially in this idea of changing the testing approach, changing the testing methodology, not doing it end to end, makes me think of let's say a compass on a ship, right? Whereas way back before compasses, people would rely on, okay, what's the position of the sun? If you were sailing at night, you had no idea where you were going. You kind of would look at the stars, but then they started making compasses and sextants, and you have now new technology to help you do things more efficiently. And you would have to actually trust that that compass is pointing you in the right direction. And guess what? It worked. So I think in a lot of these things where you're coming from, if you're a newer person coming into this and you don't have that whole history of how we used to do the functional testing, how we used to write the requirements and go through the checklists, or even doing the performance and load testing in the way that we used to have to do, you don't have that baggage of thought on with you, or maybe you can even call it technical testing debt. I don't know. I didn't come up with a term for that. But for anybody who's been in it for a while, I think there is a point where you have to start letting go and trusting the new methodologies, becoming part of them, but start trusting the new tools. There's always new tools. There's always that uncomfortable feeling with the new tool. But as what Chris is doing with some of these things, we're proving out that they're working. So thanks for sharing that with us, Chris. I really appreciate that. And it's always fun to get challenged in your comfy chair, We look forward to having you back on another episode soon. Any final words from anybody?
No, I think I'm good. I actually know one more thing though, because I took some notes. There's one more thing. Highlighting another thing that you said, which I never thought about this. you said in recruiting, when you recruit people, the first question you ask is, do you know our company, what we do? Do you understand? Because in the end, we all work on one goal, which is making our company successful. Therefore, we need to understand the business, and therefore we have to understand what we do, right? And I think that's very interesting. I never heard that before.
Right. So if anyone's looking to hire, make sure you at least look them up on Wikipedia or something. Do you know what we do? Have you actually had people come in and say, like, no, not really? Like,
no, absolutely. So our process is phone screen, first interview, second interview, and then job. And sometimes we do the face-to-face interviews on the same day.
Uh-huh.
But on the phone screen, it's amazing how many people you say, okay, so you're applying to a peer-to-peer company. What's peer-to-peer? And they're like, well, I don't know. It happens a lot. And
wow.
I was reading something on share options in the States, and they work quite well over there. People don't really understand them here, apparently, according to some articles I read recently. And actually, I think that's the idea, is that they're not as connected to the business as perhaps in other places.
Well, some interviewing 101 people know what the company does that you're going to interview for.
Absolutely.
Kids these days, I swear. Anyway, if anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to tweet them at us at pure_DT. You can also email us at pureperformance@dynatrace.com. Check us out on Spreaker. Chris, do you have a Twitter? Do you tweet?
I don't tweet much, but I do have an account, so it's Chris Burrell 7.
Okay.
So yeah, that's me.
Maybe if he gets more followers, he'll have to start tweeting more. And you could tweet pictures of puppies or cats. People always love those. So, all right. Everybody, thank you all, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Thanks.